ESO catches a lot of strays from the Elder Scrolls and the MMO communities.
I can't take that seriously. I'm sorry, I can't. It's so ridiculous. It's a dog, yeah.
Some people think it's not as immersive as the mainline TES games. I'm some people. Others say it's not part of the Elder Scrolls canon. Majority will have something negative to say about how the game handles microtransactions, and most will complain about the game's combat for one reason or another. Well, the ESO devs have mentioned that they're interested in addressing a lot of these pain points this year, including those that concern the game's combat system. And we've already seen some of these promises put into action by way of the recent Dragonknight class animation and balance refresh that rolled out on update 49. Next up on the docket, the devs plan to rework the Werewolf's model, skills, and skill animations, add some new special passives that only pure classes can use to help bolster their power, and even introduce a system to give players the option to increase the difficulty of their encounters to make them more engaging and rewarding. All of this will be free for all players, and we can expect all of this to go live in update 50. All of these aforementioned plans for update 50 and more were discussed in the March developer livestream, and they'll be summarized here in this video. I've already discussed the proposed challenge difficulty and class mastery systems in my last video that summarized a previous stream where those two updates were revealed for the very first time, so this video won't be repeating all of that information. Instead, it will be recapping the new developments that have been made that were shared in the most recent stream. You don't need to have watched that older video first, but if you want to learn even more about these subjects, I'll leave a link to that one in the description. Alright, don't forget to smash the like and subscribe buttons with your 5-head for a chance to win a free Nokia phone, and with that all out of the way, let's jump into the video.
Don't want to go too far into the sexy werewolf territory, right? She's going to be a sexy beast, but the emphasis here is on beast.
Did you guys know that the werewolf model is one of the oldest models in the game? Honestly, that doesn't surprise me at all to hear that. I mean, look at this creature. That looks goofy as hell. The developers are revisiting and refreshing the werewolf model in update 50, as well as adding a female model that is still in development. The devs acknowledged that the old werewolf model was very cartoonish, and they'd really like to step away from that kind of vibe. As ESO's art has developed over the years, the devs have established the kind of style they want to go for, so the werewolf model is being updated to accommodate that. Their hands and dogs are a little smaller, other body proportions have been changed up, and their fur is more pronounced, as opposed to being all matted and shit. Fun fact, the tech that they developed to use for newer mounts has been repurposed to give the new werewolf models more depth and floofiness, as they put it.
He definitely got a hairbrush. To roughen up his hair there a little bit, make him look
a little bit, yeah.
He got a style, yeah, he got a little bit of style.
As it stands, there are two other fur color options that you can have, depending on if you take the pack leader or the berserker morph, with the former morph resulting in white fur and the latter in black fur. But in the future, the devs want to promote customization without any limiting factors. So the black, white, and gray fur options will be free, earnable skill styles that players can pick and choose from, as opposed to having those different colored furs locked behind build decisions like what morph you decide to pick. As I mentioned, right now, those differing werewolf furs are what allow players to differentiate between the different morphs and identify what kind of werewolf another player might be: a pack leader, a berserker, or a scrub. Since fur colors won't be tied to morphs in update 50 and beyond, the developers will be adding other means for players to be able to identify what kind of werewolf they've encountered, such as by adding visual effects. Speaking of visuals, Alec Varish commented that the current werewolf spammable piercing howl also looked kinda goofy. He's not wrong, you basically just yell at things until they pass away.
Stop it on me. Or you're just yelling.
I'm yelling.
You're like, ah! Ah!
Oh.
Ah!
Ah.
Oh.
Again, because the devs want to move away from this goofy ass shit and lean more heavily into the viciousness of the werewolf, they'll be replacing this silly scream attack with a new spammable called Gnash. This two-part skill will make your werewolf character bite into an enemy and rip out a chunk of flesh. The first part of the bite is a physical attack, and then when you rip out the flesh, you'll dish out some bleed damage to your target, and that bleed will have some execute to it. Finally, the werewolf will have a proper bite attack. Kinda crazy that they never had one until now, right? Also, tell me, why the fuck was Mike Finnegan mewing so hard during this part of the stream?
My name is Skylar White, yo.
When you go into your werewolf transformation upon casting that ultimate, you have limited bar space, and that kind of truncates the amount of combat abilities that you can have. So the devs are taking this multifaceted approach to the reworking of these werewolf skills to make up for a lack of bar space, while keeping combat a bit more on the simpler side. That is the essence of the werewolf mode, after all. It's not meant to have a very high skill ceiling, mechanically. It's more about how you move around, knowing when to be aggressive versus defensive, etc., instead of juggling buffs and the like. The existing ability, Pounce, already kind of accomplishes this by having two parts to it. You can hit the skill once to gap close to an enemy, and then hit the skill again to do a stronger slash attack, Carnage, to your enemy. So this one skill has two separate functions, a dash and a melee attack with a bleed. However, this skill can be kinda janky. If you pounce on an enemy and kill them before you activate the skill again to cast the slash attack, and then you want to pounce on another enemy that's a little ways away, too bad. That's rough, buddy. You can't. That skill will be stuck on that slash mode, which is not always what you want, especially if you're looking to jump to another enemy since you are no longer near any targets. If you want one skill or the other, you don't really have control over that. In Update 50, that skill will be changed such that it works dynamically based on your distance. If you are far away from your enemy, then you will always be able to jump to them with this skill, and if you're already right in front of your enemy and you want to cast Carnage on them, you won't have to randomly jump on them again before doing so. You'll be able to just bitch slap them right away. In conclusion, the werewolf skill rework strives to make abilities simpler and easier to understand, while also giving players more agency and power for different combat scenarios. We delved into the design philosophies that governed the inception of the class mastery system and the goals that the developers have in mind for it in my last video. All of that information was disclosed in last month's stream, but this month the developers gave us a closer look at what some of these special passives are going to look like and how they're going to interact with our gameplay. Real quick, the class mastery system is the developers' proposed solution to the problems that subclassing introduced to the game, namely the fact that pure classes, aka characters that use all three of their native class skill lines and don't engage with the subclassing system, kinda got screwed over. Simply put, at the more competitive levels of gameplay where this kind of stuff matters, subclass builds tend to perform much better than pure class builds do, and that has really promoted this homogenization of build development, where so many players who participate in higher end PvP and PvE activities tend to run the exact same builds, down to the very same skill lines and even skills. So the devs wanted to fix this dilemma and even things out a bit. In Update 50, when you reach the max level on all three of your native skill lines, you will unlock the class mastery for that class. This consists of 5 passives that players can pick up to 2 from to use at any time. They won't cost any skill points to assign, and they can be changed via the respec menu whenever you'd like, whenever it's possible to respec, of course. Some of the class mastery passives play into the different classes' key mechanics, such as crux management on the Arcanist or fighting on consecrated ground on a Templar, while others complement and support the different roles that exist in the game: damage dealing, healing, and tanking. Alec took a moment to remind viewers that what we're about to see is a first pass of a very iterative, very experimental system, so things like numerical values and names and trigger conditions, among other things, are very much subject to change before these passives go live, and even further down the line, when the other classes get their time in the limelight with the class refresh initiative, so just keep that in mind. Try to focus more on the general gist of these new class mastery passives and the way these new passives may interact with the existing passives and power fantasies of each class to affect their gameplay, as opposed to the numbers and durations that you see on the screen. I'd also like to think that a majority of my subscribers know how to read, so I'm not going to sit here and read out the tooltips of these class mastery passives like I'm reading y'all a bedtime story or some shit. Instead, what I'm going to do is share the driving factors that influence the creation of these kinds of passives that the devs disclosed on stream. Kinda like a peek behind the curtain at ZeniMax Online Studios. Starting off with the Templar, there was a large emphasis on the Templar's existing Sacred Ground passive and the subsequent playstyle that emerges from it when when designing these class mastery passives. That being, standing in your own Templar abilities that leave runes on the ground while fighting to empower yourself and your allies, or to f up your foes. These class mastery passives play into that attrition playstyle that Templars are known for by providing additional benefits to pure class Templars who fight in their consecrated ground. Some of these benefits include additional resource management, shields, ultimate regeneration, block mitigation, and more. Some of these passives also have a lot of synergy with one another, and they were intentionally designed that way. The Missionary of Light skill heals you whenever you stand in your own sacred ground, and Sacred Anchor creates some sacred ground beneath you whenever you brace. So, those two passives interact quite nicely, and you'll be able to heal yourself while bracing. OG Sorc mains may recognize the naming of one passive in particular here, Implosion, aka what happens to my white boyfriend's digestive tract anytime he eats the spicy Mexican food I cook up for him. The old Implosion passive, which hasn't existed for a hot minute, got nuked for balance reasons, but it's been reworked and reintroduced to the game in a way that's meant to be a bit healthier and not broken beyond belief. Alec assured us that this passive in particular would have unique interactions between PvE and PvP to ensure that no issues arise there. It was reported that during the internal testing phase, devs really flocked to the Conservation of Energy passive. It works by upgrading the existing Blood Magic passive such that it works with any ability that you activate, instead of only dark magic abilities, making it really effective for resource management. Lastly, Alec touched on Parallel Protection, which allows you to receive 2 damage shields every time you cast a shield, with the secondary shield being a bit smaller. He mentioned that this kind of passive was meant to illuminate the Sorcerer's innate strength and efficiency when it comes to magic casting, even when they may have limited magicka at their disposal. The DK received a major refresh in Update 49, and the devs leaned into some of the newer additions to their toolkit when developing these DK class mastery passives. For example, the Unstoppable class mastery passive interacts with the DK's new Landslide passive to make it complement all rolls by increasing healing done, damage done, and shielding strength per stack of Landslide. The longer you persist in the battle, the stronger you become, and this further reinforces the DK's whole attrition power fantasy that the devs were looking to emphasize with that recent class refresh. The class mastery passives Booming Voice and Rousing Roar also enhance the DK's Storm Voice passive. The Storm Voice's benefits are activated whenever you cast an ultimate, so pure class DK players will be able to receive or bestow upon allies even more benefits when ulting if they decide to slot either of these new class mastery passives. Lastly, the devs also wanted to find a way to make up for some of the losses that were noted after the DK rework dropped. A lot of DK enjoyers mentioned that they missed the old Helping Hands passive, for example, so the devs found a means to reintroduce some of that old passive's utility by way of the Immovable Mountain class mastery passive. This passive allows you to regain stamina while blocking, and the longer you block, the stronger and more sturdy, like a mountain, you become. Stealth is a notion that comes to mind when recalling the Nightblade class. However, the devs deliberately chose not to play into that specific gameplay aspect with these class mastery passives because stealth could get way too strong in PvP environments while being largely irrelevant and ineffective in PvE ones. So instead, the devs sought to lean into the critical sensation of the Nightblade, the heavy burst damage, the fat crits, you know the deal. Critical motivation significantly upgrades the existing Hemorrhage passive, allowing Nightblades to generate way more ultimate. The devs also introduced a new piece of tech that will be present in the Above and Beyond class mastery passive, and that is the ability to override existing caps. So, with this new passive, Nightblades will be able to surpass the existing crit cap to hit even fatter healing and damage crits, which is pretty mental. As a Nightblade main, I'm a huge fan of that Evasive Trance passive, which Alec mentioned was meant to fulfill their duelist behavior by adding a sort of parry or dodge window whenever they activate a Nightblade ability. When fighting a Nightblade 1v1, that Nightblade is going to be very slippery and even harder to hit with a passive like this one slotted. Alec admits that the proposed class mastery passives for the Warden may look a bit on the generic side, and that's largely in part because the Warden is actively being reworked as per the devs class refresh initiative as we speak. Regardless, the Warden class mastery passives are meant to reinforce the Warden's power fantasy of being one with nature and utilizing a shitload of status effects effects. Hypothermia, for example, upgrades the existing chilled status effect to also apply major brittle for a short duration of time, and this will help provide a lot of critical damage to you and your group members. Thick hide also makes you harder to kill when you are really laying it on thick with the status effect spam, and wild adaptation makes you even more effective at nuking enemies with a shitload of status effects on them, or healing allies who have been afflicted by a bunch of status effects, which is pretty neat. Alec immediately reminded us that the names of all these skills sound really edgy, maybe a little too edgy, and that they will likely be reworked to be more lore friendly or lore accurate, but honestly, I'm a big fan of the edgy names and I think they should stay. Lord of the Cycle sounds based as hell, dude. Okay, I will admit, Pound of Flesh does sound a little silly, a little sussy even. These class mastery passives aim to reinforce Necromancer's corpse consumption mechanics. Normally, the corpse consumption passive gives you ultimate every time you use a skill to consume a corpse, whether that's an enemy that you slayed, a player that you nuked, or a reanimated pet from one of your skills that has died again. Cycle of Death upgrades that passive to also mark the nearest enemy to whatever corpse was just consumed, and that marked enemy will also be treated as a corpse. This creates some pretty fun interaction opportunities, as you can imagine. One example is how this would interact with the Necromancer's class set from Infinite Archive that makes corpses explode when they're consumed. If an enemy player registers as a corpse because of this passive, and you use a corpse consumption skill on that player while wearing that class set, yeah, you see where I'm going with this. The devs have introduced some new tech through the Nothing Wasted passive, which allows players to have stacks decay instead of losing all of them at once. You see, normally whenever players build up stacks of anything through a skill or a set or what have you that have a duration, and then that duration ends, all of those stacks fall off. With this passive, instead of losing all of your Nothing Wasted stacks at once, when the duration ends, you will only lose one. Unsurprisingly, the Arcanist passives interact with their crux generation mechanic, since that's their whole deal. Abyssal Pact, a passive that gives players full crux every time they use an ultimate, was originally an internal design that was meant to be an actual passive for the Arcanist class when it was set to drop a couple years back. But it was decided during development that it was way too strong, so they ended up canning that idea. Now that they know that pure class Arcanists need a bit more power to make up for the power imbalance issues introduced in the world of subclassing, they figured it'd be a reasonable idea to bring this discarded passive back to see the light of the live servers. Self-perpetuated fate makes it so that anytime you spend any amount of crux, you get full crux back, allowing you to do things like double beam or use abilities that you couldn't use before in tandem, such as 2 consecutive crux consumption skills like Fate Carver and Tentacular Dread. This opens up new build paths that are only available to pure class Arcanists. Alec wrapped up by saying that they've already received a lot of feedback from the first time that they ever talked about this new system, and they're already considering a lot of what's been offered, such as increasing the amount of passives that you can have, exploring the possibility of having class mastery active abilities as opposed to just passive ones, and more. But that all will likely not be iterated on until much later down the line, and not for update 50. Ultimately, the class mastery system is meant to solve a problem, as touched on earlier, and they'll make adjustments to this system as necessary to make sure that this goal is reached. Real quick, for those who didn't watch my last video, we learned in February that the developers are looking to add a means for players to be able to adjust the amount of damage that they receive from and dish out to enemies, by way of adjusting their challenge difficulty level, something that can be done for free at any time through the character menu. Think of the Skyrim difficulty sliders and how that system works. That's essentially what we'll be getting in ESO. The challenge difficulty system will not apply to areas that have their own bespoke difficulty levels, such as PvP zones, trials, dungeons, Infinite Archive, arenas, etc. The devs have polished up the UI for this new system a bit, and the different names for each of the modes have been updated. The easiest mode is Adventurer, and then we've got Seasoned, Master, and finally Vestige. Someone commented in my last video that the modes should be named Game Journalist, Role Player, Dad, and Unemployed. And honestly, I think I like those names better. Sauce, hire this man. Journalist for the lowest difficulty level is fucking taking me out, dude. The devs have also added text beneath each difficulty level to briefly describe each difficulty and how it's meant to feel feel like, as well as the exact percent modifiers for damage done and damage taken that each difficulty level will apply. Some additional information that was revealed about this system is the fact that players will be able to adjust their difficulty at any time and as early as level 1, although players will not be able to adjust their difficulty levels in the tutorial. Also, environmental traps will actually be quite deadly on the harder difficulties now. Currently, environmental traps are kind of a f***ing joke. They barely do any damage at all, so most players don't really pay them any mind, but Finn made it seem like they'll one-shot you on the hardest difficulty, Vestige, which is kind of fun, I won't lie. It sounds like they're gonna start feeling like the traps in Skyrim. The new trial, Crimson Veldt, was first teased in January, and while it is still actively in development, Finn was able to share a tiny morsel of information about it. Finn revealed that the new trial takes place in Hircine's hunting grounds, but they'll look a little different than we've seen them look in the game in the past. When creating environments based on different Daedric princes, the devs like to examine the different aspects that each Daedric prince represents and build off of those concepts. For example, with the Deadlands DLC, the devs went with the traditional fire and brimstone Deadlands, fit for a Daedric Prince of Destruction, but then they also created these unique Stormlands that also adhere to the theme of destruction. Since Hircine is the Daedric Prince of the Hunt, his Daedric realm is often depicted as being a forest, filled with animals to hunt, much like we've seen in the dungeon March of Sacrifices. But for this instance of his hunting grounds, the devs cooked up a savanna-like landscape with canyons and the like. This here is one of the first concept pieces that they had for the zone, which is meant to represent what the starting area with all the quest givers and crafting stations may end up looking like. Once you port into the trial, you'll load into a spot that kinda looks like this. You can see that same starting area in this concept piece. Players will load into this building here, and then take a long-ass elevator to descend into the trial. Wait, elevators weren't invented in the second era, so I guess everyone's gonna have to walk down quite a few flights of stairs. Bosmer mains will just be able to jump down, I'm sure. This piece here is another angle of the starting building that you would initially port into that adds to the mood and atmosphere of the place while also contributing to the story. But Finn didn't want to delve too much deeper into that notion, as those are some spoilers that he's not ready to reveal just yet. And this last piece is of an area in the trial known as the Butcher's Belly, and that's all he said about that. Looks kind of creepy though. Alright, that's it for the March developer stream recap. What are we thinking, chat? What stands out the most to me is the whole class mastery system. I'm personally a huge fan of what the devs have cooked up for that. In ESO, I found that I prefer to stick to playing a pure class. I guess primarily because I'm a f***ing role player. What can I say? I really like the idea of leaning into my two main characters' class identities through their playstyles, and through their drip, of course. However, playing as a pure class puts me at a pretty noticeable disadvantage in more competitive environments, namely PvP instances. I'm really doing myself and my team a massive disservice by not adhering to a more meta support loadout, which requires me to subclass, for example, and that kinda sucks. But I'm glad that I'll be able to pick up some unique passives that bolster my class's power fantasy and playstyle soon enough, and I hope it helps give me that more competitive edge where it matters most, without having to sacrifice class identity. Thanks for watching, everyone. These kinds of videos always take me a while to do. There's always a lot of editing involved, which takes an ungodly amount of time, and in this case, I even had to go and become a fucking furry and level up my fursona skill line just for this video. So if you appreciate my sacrifices, you can support my efforts by liking the video, subscribing, becoming a channel member, or sharing this video with your grandma. Shout out to my members for the additional support as always, and I'll see you all in the next one. Cheers.